Okay, we may get a few more folks joining us, but we'll go ahead and get started. Good afternoon and welcome to the seminar series, Happy 20th Anniversary to the Cooperative Ecosystem Studies Units, or CESUs, Successes in Science and Scholarship Management Partnerships. My name is Lisa Gerloff, and I am the Executive Director of the Rocky Mountains CESU. I recognize quite a few names in our audience, but for those of you who may be unfamiliar, the CESU network is a national consortium of 17 biogeographic units comprised of federal agencies, academic institutions, tribes, state and local governments, non-governmental conservation organizations, and other partners working together to support informed stewardship of the natural and cultural resources on our federal lands. In celebration of the 25th anniversary of the CESU network, this series is highlighting the successful partnerships between subject matter experts and managers facilitated through two of the first CESUs established in 1999, the North Atlantic Coast and the Rocky Mountains. These presentations will focus on the origins and evolution of the partnerships, provide an overview of their bodies of work, and provide tangible examples of how the science and scholarly work served to inform resource management. In 2 weeks, on April 10th, at this same time, we will be sharing a successful partnership from the North Atlantic Coast CESU. Dr. Isaac Guinness from the Graduate School of Oceanography at the University of Rhode Island will present Modeling the Combined Effects of Storms and Sea Level Rise in New England to Inform Coastal Management. More information on this presentation, along with the registration link, will be emailed out to all of you. Today, from the Rocky Mountains CESU, we get to learn about the Crown Managers Partnership. Excuse me. And joining us today is a very distinguished panel representing the diverse organizations that make up the Crown Partnership Steering Committee. So today we have Tara Caroline, who is the director of the Crown of the Continent Research Learning Center at Glacier National Park. Michael Derglow, Jr., who is the director of the Division of Environmental Protection and the Climate Change Partnership Coordinator for the Confederate Salish and Kootenai tribes. Elliot Fox, who is the proprietor of VLOX Ecological Consulting, Indigenous Communities Liaison for the Resilience Institute, a Kainai First Nation member, and the project manager for the Environmental Protection and Conservation with the Blackfoot Confederacy Tribal Council. We have Sean Finn, who is the science coordinator for the Science Application Program for the Fish Wildlife Service, Region 6. Aaron Sexton, who is a senior scientist at the University of Montana, Flathead Lake Biological Station, and Ann Carlson, who is the director of the Crown of the Continent Landscape Program for the Wilderness Society. Thank you all for being with us here today. This panel will present for about 40 minutes, and we'll have plenty of time for questions and discussions afterwards. So I'm very happy to turn it over to Aaron Sexton to get us started.
Thanks, Lisa, and thank you to everyone who has joined us on the webinar today. Sean, you can advance to the next slide and even to the next one after that. So as Lisa said, I'm with the University of Montana Flathead Lake Biological Station. I joined the station in 2007. That's also the year I joined the CMP Steering Committee. And my fun fact is that I attended the first meeting of the Crown Managers Partnership in 2001 as a graduate student at UM 23 years ago. So today we have 6 speakers from around the crown of the continent. I'll MC the transitions between everyone, and I'm going to start off with a brief overview of our talk. Then Elliot's going to provide some history and our founding story at the Crown Managers Partnership. Then Tara will talk to how Glacier Park works with the CMP and the CESU. And then Sean Finn will speak to how his agency has also worked with the Crown Managers Partnership and the CESU over the years. And then Ann Carlson with the Wilderness Society and Mike Derglo with the Confederated Sedition Kootenai Tribes will finish us off to talk about how our Indigenous partners work across this landscape with us, and some new emerging and grants and projects that we have. Then we'll have time for discussion. Next slide, please, Sean. So to understand the Crown Managers Partnership, you really have to start off with an understanding of the landscape, which is the Crown of the Continent ecosystem. And first and foremost, the Crown of the Continent is the historical and present day homelands of the tribes and First Nations that call this land their home. In addition, it's a largely native landscape. It's known for its ecological connectivity and its exceptional biological diversity. It spans the provinces of British Columbia and Alberta, Northwest Montana, and Canada and the US. It has Waterton Glacier International Peace Park at its heart, and it is also a water tower for North America in that water flows in all 3 directions off the peaks of the Crown of the Continent. Next slide, please, Sean. And this is a picture taken on the boundary of Waterton Glacier International Peace Park. And while the landscape is known for its ecological connectivity and intactness, it also is a heavily fragmented landscape in terms of the management jurisdictions. Next slide, please, Sean. And so here you can see initially it was all connected tribe and First Nation homeland. And then over time, we have really carved up this landscape into essentially what are a bunch of land ownership and land management silos across federal, state, provincial, tribal, and private land. And so, as you can imagine, for a connected landscape where water and fish and wildlife regularly cross the boundaries, these jurisdictional barriers can present a real challenge for managing resources that cross boundaries, but also an opportunity. Go ahead, Sean, that's great. And so to put a finer point on this, this is from the Waterton Front Bear Project. If you're a grizzly bear in this landscape, your territory could potentially cross 2 countries, 1 province, or 2 provinces and 1 state. And depending on where you are in these jurisdictions, you could be potentially legally hunted, you could be protected under the U.S. Endangered Species Act, or have any various management status. So to solve problems like this is really why the Crown Managers Partnership came together in the early 2000s to basically, go ahead and proceed to the next slide. Thanks, Sean. To test the concept of working across boundaries. And so this is our current day vision to transcend borders and collaboratively care for life, lands, and waters in this ecosystem. And our current mission is to foster collective stewardship of the ecosystem by collaborating on common issues, sharing resources, and exchanging knowledge. And so, as I said, the first meeting was in 2001 in Cranbrook, British Columbia, where a small group of managers from around the Crown of the Continent came together to discuss whether or not it might be more effective to work across boundaries on some of the landscape scale issues that we all share. And long story short, you'll hear more about this from Elliot, but we're still here 23 years later. This is our current day steering committee and the capacity that we have to support us in doing our work. So our current focus, this is a suite of conservation priorities and stressors that are currently high priorities for the Crown Managers Partnership. We've developed these over the last 20 years, and this isn't to say this is the only thing that we work on. But as you can see, sort of the criteria for something that the CMP would work on is that it's a landscape scale issue. It definitely crosses boundaries, and it's become a agency or management priority for all of the partners at the table. So we end up with the things that rise to the top collectively for all of the agencies. And this is just a brief example of the different types of ways we can work on these issues. Sometimes when there's a real vacuum for an issue or it's a new and emerging issue, the CMP will take the lead and initiate work on something. We'll convene stakeholders and put resources towards standing up an effort towards some type of priority. Sometimes we just provide support through our agency network. That can be through our management entities or through data or science and analysis and modeling. And then sometimes we monitor where there's a lot in the crown of the continent that we don't have the capacity and that are best fits for other entities. So we just try to stay well networked and keep track of what other partners are doing in the landscape and beyond. And relative to the Cooperative Ecosystem Studies Unit, it's really been the perfect tool, a perfect tool for assisting the CMP in our partnership and doing our work, because the CESU works across agencies and actually has administrative tools for doing that. One of our biggest challenges is just moving money in the Crown Managers Partnership because we span many jurisdictions, and so CESU is a great fit for that. The reduced overhead is also fantastic in that we pool our resources in the CMP across, an 18 million acre landscape. So having that reduced overhead has also been really beneficial for the Crown Managers Partnership. And these are just a few examples of CESU projects that we've had over the years. Some of our first CESU agreements were between the University of Montana and the University of Calgary, both of which are members of the CESU. And then more recently, we have our federal agencies have agreements with the University of Montana Flathead Lake Biological Station, which is where a lot of our capacity comes out of for the partnership. Next slide. This is just some statistics on our collective impact. Over the years, we've hosted 21 annual forums. These are annual conferences that we rotate around the crown of the continent and focus on a specific issue that has risen to the top. We've done fire, invasive species. If you go to our website, you can see a full list of all of our annual forums. We currently have 5 active working groups. Those are for native salmonids, aquatic invasive species, terrestrial invasive plants, the 5-needle pines in the crown of the continent, and then the landscape conservation design, which Sean is going to speak more to. And then I'm sure this 726 number is probably outdated, but it's a conservative estimate of the reach that we've had over the years across the partnership. And as I was saying, one of our main avenues for networking and reaching large audiences in this landscape is through our annual forums. So I'm just gonna end my portion here with a pitch for our upcoming 2024 forum. We'll be hosting this forum, co-hosting it with the Akam Band of the Tunaha First Nation, and we're excited to be at the St. Eugene Resort, which is Tunaha owned in Cranbrook, British Columbia. And if you'd like more information, you can just go to the CMP website and you'll find links there to register. The forum is open to the public, and we'd love to see everyone there. And so now I'm going to pass the microphone over to Elliot Fox. Elliot is one of the founding members of the CMP Steering Committee and a member of the Kainai First Nation of the Blackfoot Confederacy. So and I'm going to skip reading long bios for everyone just to save us time, but we have more extensive biographies for all of our speakers here are on the Crown Managers Partnership website. Over to you, Elliot.
Hello. Oh, hi. Thank you, Aaron. Okay, little gua, didakax, kitkanak sumatsimpuan, sistikoi, stuan na kok, makoyo kinni. Yeah, I just said in my Blackfoot language, hello, friends and relatives. Glad to see everyone today. My Blackfoot name translates as wolf collar, and my English name is Elliot Box. Yeah, so Sean, if you want to, thank you. So I'm just going to talk about the history of the Crown Managers Partnership, or the CMP. Jurisdictional complexity has long been recognized as a barrier in managing natural resources and ecological integrity across regional ecosystems. Similarly, economic and, to a lesser extent, social systems have also been constrained by political jurisdictions. However, considerable efforts have been made over the past 3 decades in reducing economic barriers on a national and international scale. Up until the early 2000s, there had been less progress in reducing barriers to the effective management of natural resources and ecological integrity. Next slide, Sean, thank you. As an example, it was confirmed that wolves had naturally recolonized and returned to southwest Alberta in 1993 after a 40-plus year absence. A 2-year-old female wolf who had been radio collared in Glacier National Park in 1992, she was a yearling pup, dispersed east over the Continental Divide and became the alpha female of the newly established Belly River Wolf Pack. The Belly River Pack denned in Waterton Lakes National Park, and 7 pups were born in 1994. The Belly River Pack roamed lands that included Waterton Lakes, the Blood Reserve, and provincial and private lands in Alberta adjacent to Waterton Lakes. At that time, wolves were listed as endangered on the Endangered Species Act in the USA, fully protected in Waterton, and were essentially classified as vermin in the province of Alberta, with no requirements to report or register a harvested wolf, and wolves could be killed within 5 miles of a landowner's land. Yeah, I'll just add, that was my first job. I was fresh out of college in 1994, and my first job was tracking this new pack. So that was a great learning experience. And yeah, unfortunately, it was a 3-year contract. A year and a half in, the alpha female walked out of the park and she got shot. So, but that's, I guess, the way things work in this kind of a landscape. Go ahead, Sean. In the Alberta portion of the Crown, discussions began between Parks Canada, Waterton Lakes National Park, and Alberta Fish and Wildlife and forestry managers back in the mid-1990s. There were concerns about achieving common sustainable resource management objectives, with the acknowledgement that certain natural resources, fish, wildlife, water, and air, are transboundary by their very nature. Concerns about certain fish and wildlife species, namely bull trout, wolves, and grizzly bears at the time, and the differing regulatory legislation governing the management of those transboundary species were discussed. So Sean, if you just want to point out Southwest Alberta on the map, please. Yeah, that white line is the Continental Divide. Yeah, so that's the Alberta portion. So as a result, the informal Southwest Alberta Ecosystem Management Council was conceived. Next slide, please. Initial participants included former Waterton Lakes managers Bill Dolan, Kevin Van Tegum, and Rob Watt, and wildlife technician me, representing the Blood Tribe, former Alberta Fish and Wildlife managers Richard Quinlan and Daryl Wigg, and former Alberta Forestry manager Daryl Johnson. The SWANK continued informal discussions. However, no formal steps were taken to formalize that council. Next slide, thanks. An initial step, the Cranbrook Forum. In the spring of 2000, the Waterton Glacier International Peace Park agreed to explore the potential for a workshop to bring together the various jurisdictions within the larger regional ecosystem. This commitment also followed discussions between Alberta Environment and Waterton Lakes National Park. Staff from Waterton Lakes, Bill Dolan, Glacier National Park, Brace Hayden, and Alberta Environment, Ian Dyson, initiated planning for the forum with the support of staff Craig Stewart from the Me Stuckey Institute for the Rockies. So Me Stuckey is a Blackfoot word that translates to the backbone of the world or the Rocky Mountains. This small group constituted the first steering committee to plan a Crown of the Continent Managers Forum. In February 2001, representatives from various governing jurisdictions within the Crown ecosystem gathered at a workshop hosted by the Waterton Glacier International Peace Park. The goal of the workshop was to explore ways of collaborating on shared environmental issues in the Crown, an ecosystem that spans many jurisdictions. The Me Stuckey Institute for the Rockies facilitated the discussion and acted as a neutral third party. The first forum is held on February 1st and 2nd, 2001 in Cranbrook, BC, and participation included federal, Aboriginal, provincial, and state agencies or organizations with a significant land or resource management responsibility within the Crown ecosystem. And also a blend of senior and middle managers with technical and professional staff who have a role in management at the ecosystem scale. For example, conservation biologists, land use planners, etc. Primary objectives of the first forum were to build awareness of common interests and issues in the Crown, build relationships and opportunities for collaboration across mandates and borders, and to identify collaborative work already underway and opportunities for further cooperation. Throughout the workshop, participants outlined a set of concerns that needed to be addressed collaboratively across the landscape. Aaron alluded to these. I'll just quickly run through them. Cumulative effects of human activity across the ecosystem, increased public interest in how lands are managed and how decisions are made, increased recreational demands and increased visitation, sharing data, standardizing assessment and monitoring methodologies, maintenance and sustainability of shared wildlife populations. Next slide, thank you. The following year, the group was formalized as a collaborative partnership called the Crown Managers Partnership, or the CMP. In 2007, the CMP was formalized even further when the governments of the state of Montana and Alberta signed an MOU recognizing the CMP with officials from the Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribe and the Ktunaxa Nation as witnesses. British Columbia and Montana's government signed an MOU in 2010 to collaborate on climate. While the CMP is not specifically mentioned in this MOU, the CMP certainly meets its intent. The rest of the story of the CMP is history, so to speak. The CMP now consists of 12 members and associate members representing 2 nations, 4 Indigenous tribes, 2 provinces, 1 state, and several environmental NGOs. In April 2024, next month, the CMP and the Ktunaxa Nation will host the 22nd annual CMP Forum in Cranbrook. So hope to see you all there, and thank you very much. So I'll pass it on to, I think Tara is next.
Okay, go ahead to the next. Okay, so I was already introduced. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about our connection to the CESUs. Some 25 years ago, in 1999, the National Park Service issued a report called the Natural Resources Challenge, or a call to action. And this initiative was actually backed by funding, just a little unusual in Park Service, but and it launched a number of programs that supported natural resources management in the National Park Service, such as the Inventory and Monitoring Program, Research Learning Centers, and there was emphasis on collaboration through expansion of the newly formed Cooperative Ecosystem Studies Unit network. As Aaron mentioned earlier, CESUs help federal agencies access assistance from participating universities and colleges. importantly, by capping overhead at 17.5% and creating master cooperative agreements that make it relatively simple to create task agreements for new projects without reinitiating a competitive process. And a few sample projects that I've been involved with are things like getting a student to do wetland delineation for the Going to the Sun Road environmental impact statement. We've been, oh, we're not ready yet. Okay. Jerry O'Neill fellowships that we've been sponsoring since 2007. And one year had funding for our Clark's Nutcracker research. And we had one partner we were interested in working with, but they would have charged 40% overhead, which would have greatly limited the capacity of the project. So instead, we were able to use the CSU and get a lot more done with that. And of course, there have been many, many other projects over the years. Okay, now next. So for the Crown Managers Partnership, Glacier's first agreement was in 2002, and we started a project for compiling data across the Crown, conducting cumulative effects assessment, and creating a web platform to share maps and project results. And if you go onto crownmanagers.org, you can find many of these map products now. And from 2003 to the present, we have at a small but consistent support we've put towards the GIS specialist to continue analyzing data and products on behalf of the Crown Managers. And so that's a little bit of an overview of what the RMCSU does for us, but more importantly, I'm going to go on to why does it matter in the next slide. So here's an overview of some of the designations that highlight the global significance of Waterton Glacier. UNESCO, or the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, promotes world peace and security through highlighting sites of global significance around the world. So in the Waterton Glacier was designated an International Peace Park in 1932 through efforts of the local Rotary clubs. And while each of the two parks operates independently, we cooperate on a wide range of activities, from search and rescue, fire assistance, hands across the border, joint interpretive hikes, our annual Science and History Day symposium, and many more. I couldn't begin to fit on a slide all the different things that Waterton and Glacier cooperate on together. And I don't know the full history of how those cooperative activities evolved, but I do know by the mid-1990s when I arrived, there had been a long history of annual ranger warden meetings to discuss common issues, of which there were very many. And again, too many to list here. And it was interesting, the political things that would go on were so similar, sometimes at different timings, but really, really common issues between the Waterton and Glacier. And as you heard from Elliot, the more these discussions went on, the more it became apparent that even the International Peace Park was far too small of a scale to manage the resource issues that were coming our way. Okay, now next. And particularly, I want to highlight the importance of the Crown Managers Partnership to our status as biosphere reserve sites, which also underscores why the Waterton Biosphere Reserve Association is a natural partner for us. A key component of the biosphere program is to acknowledge that the local human communities are an integral part of the landscape. And about 10 years ago, most of the US biosphere sites were at risk of losing their status because they had not identified zones of cooperation, such as Waterton has done. So Sean, if you could point to Waterton out on the map, it's just that little blip, but they had that entire light blue zone has been identified as their zone of cooperation. And so where Glacier just had the park boundary. So we had to make corrections and reapply. So as we considered what would make an appropriate zone, we realized a zone of cooperation and partnerships really already existed in the form of the Crown Managers Partnership. And in 2017, our new application was accepted and we became the Crown of the Continent Biosphere Region, with the US side of the Crown of the Continent region encompassed in our biosphere region, with the hope that in the future we might become a single biosphere region. There's some complexities before we can move forward on that entirely, but that's the idea. And as I sit in meetings with other biosphere representatives, there are many doing amazing work across the world and the US. But in our discussions, whenever I mention the relationships we've established through the CMP, others are always envious of what we've created here. It's something pretty unique and special to have so many individuals from varied agencies to be willing to carve out time out of their busy schedules to make this cooperative work happen. And now we'll turn it on to the next, which I think is Sean.
Thank you, Tara. And I'll follow up with the kinds of information that Tara was sharing. So my goal here for the next few minutes is to talk a little bit about how the Rocky Mountain CESU supports the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service's mission and vice versa. And then after I talk a little bit about the service and the CESU, I'll move on to a project we've mentioned several times called the Landscape Conservation Design. But thank you for having me today, and thank you for inviting the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to be a part of the Rocky Mountain CESU. We are very proud collaborators with the CESU and have been since the very early days. I can't profess that we were involved as early as Tara and Glacier National Park, but we're very happy with this relationship. Fish and Wildlife Service provides senior staff to serve on the CESU Federal Managers Committee. We also provide opportunities for coordinated, collaborative, scientific, and scholarly activities, particularly by engaging students in the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service's research and conservation priorities, as well as providing mentorship and other, other guidance to CESU students and faculty as we do research on these public lands. We serve on graduate student committees and teach courses at a number of universities across the Rocky Mountain CESU, and then also provide administrative assistance necessary to execute the CESU agreements. Nobody is, really super excited about sort of executing these agreements, but they take a lot of work and a lot of expertise, and on both sides of the ledger, the service and the CESU benefit greatly from this relationship. Over the past 5 years, where that we have most recent synthetic information on, 2019 to 2023, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has funded 46 Rocky Mountain CESU projects, totaling $6.8 million. And as you might imagine, the Fish and Wildlife Service generally funds projects that are focused on conservation elements and necessary research for at-risk and often listed species. For example, CESU projects have addressed grizzly bear contaminants and recovery strategies in the Northern Rocky Mountains, did some extensive work on monarch butterfly genomics, and then also general pollinator sagebrush assessments and sagebrush ecosystems. It's a particularly group of taxa in an ecosystem that we know very little about, and would be very difficult for the service to gain this information without partnerships with organizations like the CESU. We've also worked on wolverine genetics and ecological connectivity in partnership, as well as looking at bull trout and West Slope cutthroat trout restoration, as well as other West Slope cutthroat trout subpopulations and subspecies throughout the Rocky Mountain region. And along with that at-risk species, we also think about some of these more landscape scale kind of issues. For example, invasive plants and their invasions into native system and disruption of functions, for example, cheatgrass, and how we might develop new strategies to combat a fairly aggressive invasive plant like that. Wildlife vehicle collision mitigation, is another aspect, as we know, as more roads get put on the landscape and vehicles are more efficient and faster, it ends up causing real problems with wildlife that are just looking to get to the other side of the road to find foraging habitat. And the service, the CESU has been provided a lot of research on wildlife vehicle collision mitigation. The Rocky Mountain CSU has also been an important component of this landscape conservation design that we're developing in the Crown of the Continent. And I'm going to transition to talk a little bit about the landscape conservation design, or the LCD. As indicated, the Rocky Mountain Cooperative Ecosystem Studies Unit is an important component, as exemplified by it being listed as the first project example under the recent 5-year self-assessment review completed by the CESU. The CESU facilitated transfer of some $235,000 to the University of Montana Flathead Lake Biological Station to help us develop and deliver this culminating priority, the Crown Managers Partnership recent strategic conservation framework, uniting all conservation priorities into a single perspective that's not only multi-featured or multi-species, but also interjurisdictional, and developing not only sophisticated modeling and science, but shared development of conservation strategies to address threats to these features across these large landscapes. So what is a landscape conservation design? Fancy words, right? Capital letters, but it's very simply, it's something that we've been trying to achieve for a long, long time across these large geographies. And essentially, it's a structured approach to a partner-driven process that achieves a sustainable, resilient landscape, which meets the ecological and the social needs of current and future generations. Landscape conservation design is well documented in the ecological literature and in agency documents. And a recent evaluation by the Fish and Wildlife Service indicated that there was 25 active and current LCDs across the nation. And you can see that on the map there. They're pretty well distributed and extend into both Canada and Mexico. This is, an emerging but fairly advanced approach to integrating social and ecological systems and thinking about how we manage them as a whole. But as you can see in the picture in the middle there, right, they're partnership driven, right? So this doesn't happen by an agency or by an organization. It's all of them working together. And in our particular area, this LCD surrounds the area known as the Crown of the Continent that you've heard a lot about. The Crown of the Continent Landscape Conservation Design convened a leadership team, which includes many of the Crown Managers partnerships. But as we learned, the CMP is very focused on resource management agencies. That's only a sliver of all of the stakeholders in a geography like the Crown of the Continent. And so the LCD leadership team includes those resource management organizations and our indigenous, tribal, and First Nation partners, but also local communities, non-governmental organizations, and user groups like recreational groups that also have a stake in this geography. Together, we developed a vision to ensure a resilient, connected landscape that supports healthy ecosystems and human communities, and set up a number of goals that included things like equity, diversity, and inclusion, as well as social and cultural and economic elements of the landscape, as well as the ecological landscapes. An LCD is equal parts process and product, right? Meaning that the relationships built, the trust building, the sharing of information, and the openness of working together is as important as the products that we develop. An LCD well run is inclusive, holistic, transparent, and iterative, with the recognition that both our traditional knowledges and our Western approaches are only looking at some portion of the landscape. There's still a lot out there that we don't know about. And as we gain our knowledge, as we understand and work together and trust each other, we will continually to update and improve the design for a future that's resilient and sustainable. So just as a quick example here, and my colleagues on today's call know I could wax poetically on landscape conservation design for hours, but I'll just briefly mention today that part of the LCD process, as I mentioned, is getting together and understanding what kinds of things we want to focus on the landscape, right? We think about these things as important, but they are not necessarily priorities or the only important things. They are good representations, in this case, the structured feature selection option and the features that we focus on the landscape, right, tend to be very important to everyone and also representative of broader biodiversity and cultural concerns on the landscape. Together, we build out very conceptually driven situation analyses for each one of these features. So we work together to ensure that we understand the system well enough to move forward on it, and that we can agree on things like stressors and threats to the particular feature. Then once we get to that point where we've sort of gotten the process underway and we feel like we trust and understand each other, we move on to developing some products. And these include both spatially explicit designs for the future on the landscape, and then strategies to go about achieving that design and to achieve our mission of resilient and sustainable landscapes. I'd love to talk more about it, but I know we have to move on here. So folks are welcome to reach out through the Crown Managers Partnership website or the LCD web pages and reach out to us, because the LCD is nothing if not inclusive and participatory. So please join us. So by the numbers, LCD currently has 42 partner and stakeholder organizations, including 4 tribes and First Nations, 2 provinces, 1 state, and many local communities throughout the Crown of the Continent. The LCD is inclusive. It covers 13 million hectares across the Crown of the Continent ecosystem. We are evaluating 15 ecological features, including 5 listed species that you see on the right-hand side of your screen. It's grizzly bear, bull trout, Canada lynx, white bark pine, and wolverine. We are also working on 5 social, cultural, and economic features. And together, like I said, these are not sort of the full breadth of the social and cultural diversity of the geography, but they are very representative of that diversity. And there's a certain amount of, there's only a certain amount of data and modeling we can handle. And so that's the leadership team selected these features, and that's what we focus on. We've brought in 51 subject matter experts. Over the course of where we are right now, we've interrogated more than 200 spatial data sets describing these features and the threats and the relative level of threats across this landscape. Of those 200 data sets, we used 95 during our phase 2 analysis. Phase 2 is just sort of a benchmark, a milestone, if you will, because as I mentioned, iterative is an important element of what an LCD is. And we're entering phase 3 right now of phase 4 of 4 phases. We expect to be complete in 2025, but that gives us almost 2 years here now to continue to work together. All of this information is available at the crownmanagers.org landscape conservation design page, and we welcome you to visit the site, to join us, contact us, and participate as a resident of the Crown geography in the Crown LCD. So with that, I will turn it over to Mike and Anne. Thank you.
Anne, am I first? Yep. Thanks. You could go to the next slide. Thanks. It's been, I apologize, and thanks, Anne, for reaching out to me earlier. Man, it's been a pretty hectic few few days, they're in the process of moving my office. Just recently, I became the full-time climate coordinator for the tribe, where I've been working for the Confederate Salish and Kootenai tribes for over 40 years. So we just recently started moving my office, and I was worried that I wasn't going to have a computer today. But anyway, good to see everybody. Ches halcha pesia etchesuisum het Louis Quex. Kisu quicknum oxmak nekukatlik skawas gaklautla. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Standing Grizzly Bear. My English name is Mike Derglo, and I'm very honored and glad to be here with you today. Before I get started, I just want to share a little tidbit with you. I think the Crown Managers Partnership is a very awesome group of people that we've been working together for quite a long time, and I've been part of this awesome group. I don't even know for sure how many years, but I was recently not appointed by Deb Haaland, the Secretary of the Interior, to serve on the Advisory Council for Climate Adaptation and Science. And I bragged about the CMP and how well we really worked together. And I just shared that we was a model for others to look at. And I think what's going to happen, and I don't know if I've told the CMP, the others yet, but I think we might be asked to host the first in-person meeting of the leadership team. So let's get ready for that. So we were one of the first tribes in the United States to develop a climate strategy. This was back in 2012. We started in September of 2012 and finished in September of 2013. So it took us exactly a year, and at that time, I was the environmental director for the tribe, and my supervisor and his supervisor asked me if I would coordinate the effort to develop that strategy. Actually, they called it an adaptation plan. A lot of the people were calling them adaptation plans, and I chose to call us a strategic plan because I think it's more than just adapting. It's also trying to do the things that mitigating for the damages or the things that are happening around us. So we were one of the first tribes. I think the Swinomish were the first tribe, and their plan focused on sea level rise. The Nez Perce were working on theirs when I started ours. And ours, I felt like, is very comprehensive in that it includes 9 different sectors. You can see all those sectors on the right-hand side of that slide. Next slide, please. When I was in DC, actually I was in Shepherdstown, West Virginia, I was asked to be a part of an Indigenous Knowledge Working Group and to develop a guidebook and training around Indigenous knowledge for the Department of Interior. And when I was the environmental director for the tribe, I was also the co-chair on the National Tribal Science Council. And in that position, I had the opportunity to visit with the Onondaga tribe and Chief Orin Lions in back east, and they brought us to the Longhouse, and they talked about a 2-row wampum belt that they had made long time ago, and that wampum belt represented 2 vessels that were traveling down the same waterway. And this is an image that I had a friend of mine, Ron Oden, draw up for me, and it represents those 2 vessels that are traveling the same waterway, and one is a ship and one is a canoe. And I used to say that we are trying to indigenize Western science. I no longer say that because I think that we each have our own knowledge systems. One is Western science and one is indigenous knowledge, and they are equally important. And we should always respect each other's knowledge and systems and not try to assimilate or indigenize or whatever each other, that we use those tools to help each other during those rough water times, right? During times of maybe we're hitting the rapids and we need to help each other out. So the bullets on this image here represent some of the important things that we talked about when I was in Shepherdstown with the indigenous knowledge holders. And basically you can read those. It's acknowledging historical harms. Indigenous knowledge is in the land with the communities. And the other part of that is the communities are in the land. Relationships to other people and to Mother Earth. Walk in beauty and inspire. Respect each other. We talked about engagement versus consultation, and to understand capacity. And sometimes no means no. When we ask our elders for advice, sometimes they might tell us no, and that means no. So next slide, please. This is part of our new plan. This was I call it my awake vision that I had one morning. Sometimes I wake up at like 3 o'clock in the morning. It's like, oh my gosh, this stuff is going in my head and I can't go back to sleep. And this really represents connectivity of all things, including us. I put us in the middle, but we're not necessarily in the middle of the universe, where we have a responsibility to all the things around us, and all of these different images represent a sector in the plan: people, water, air, fisheries, wildlife, infrastructure, and I don't remember exactly every one of them, but it represents that connectivity. And you could read more about this in the plan. And yeah, next slide, please. This is another one of those times when I woke up at like 3 in the morning and had this image in my head. This is, I don't know if you've all heard of the RAD framework. It's resist, accept, direct. It's fairly new. And when I've been working with the North Central Task Climate Adaptation Science Center on a project up in Glacier Park, where we're really trying to build better relationships between agencies and tribes. And to start a really good relationship, we need to have that foundation. And that foundation is on the bottom of this teepee, where we collaborate, communicate, coordinate, and cooperate with each other. And that whole system of trust comes together in all the generations, that 7 generations in the past, 7 generations in the future. And that relationship has to start at the conceptual stage. When you have the idea, or you have a plan to, say you're planning to replace St. Mary's Bridge up in Glacier National Park, and a lot of agencies do this. They'll hire a firm or an engineering firm to develop a plan, and then they'll send it to us for review. Well, then we tell them no, that we don't like that plan, because that whole area is a historic campsite, and we do not want you excavating or digging up all those. So your footprint needs to be smaller. So in that scenario, then if you would have invited us to the table from the very beginning, the conceptual stage, we could have worked through that whole the project planning and coordination, and clear through to completion. So that's what this represents, is that building of partnerships, relationships, and building of trust. Next slide, please. Oh, that's mine. And so now I will turn it over to Anne Lemlumch.
Thank you, Mike. And it's so wonderful to be here with all of you today. I'm Ann Carlson. And Sean, you might actually go back one slide. And I just like to give people a little more time to reflect on these really important concepts that Mike has shared. I've had the good fortune and honor of working with Mike now for over 12 years, I think, in support in whatever ways make sense to him and other members of the Confederated Salish and Kootenai Tribal Climate Change Advisory Committee in support of the development and implementation of their strategic climate plan. And it's been a real gift in my life and in my work, as has all of the relationships and partnerships and work with the Crown Managers Partnership. As I think you can all see and appreciate, the very generous sharing of Indigenous knowledge and worldviews by Mike and Elliot and other Indigenous leaders has profoundly changed and improved the way in which the Crown Managers Partnership goes about the work of trying to sustain all of the values and the species and the waters and the lands in ways that will allow them to be here 7 generations from now. And we're so lucky to have the opportunity to engage with them and learn from them, and more than 10,000 years of stewardship and incredibly sophisticated management practices across the landscape and the region. And so we sit on, not only do we engage with one another on reserves and reservations, we engage with one another and sit with one another on leadership teams and steering committees like the Crown Managers Partnership and the Crown Landscape Conservation Design Coalition. And this really allows us to support the bringing forward of the vision and knowledge of Indigenous leaders and nations into spaces that are much larger across the Aboriginal homelands of tribes and First Nations. Next slide, please. And it's with this that we are able to bring the work that we are all trying to do together full circle. And so what I'll talk about today is a new opportunity, which is a new America the Beautiful Challenge grant. We were incredibly delighted and thrilled beyond words to have our $3.5 million grant selected for full funding by the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation in November. And this is really taking all of the work that we're doing together in our partnerships into a grant that allows on-the-ground management and biocultural restoration that is led and administrated by the Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribes, but then includes the Crown Managers Partnership, other Indigenous nations and communities, and the Crown LCD as partners. And so the America the Beautiful initiative is a historic commitment to protect 30% of US lands and waters by the year 2030. And the idea is to really think about how to make sure the future is one that leads to engagement and benefit for all people and centers Indigenous voices, as well as frontline communities in advocating for goals that make sense within specific regions and in place. So this new grant is an example of that outcome touching down directly in the Crown. The funding arm of this initiative includes $1 billion of federal grants that are intended to accelerate work to connect wildlife corridors, large landscapes, and watersheds, and to improve ecosystem and community resilience to climate-related impacts while expanding access to the outdoors. And as I said, support for tribally led priorities and conservation efforts are a core area of focus. And we're incredibly grateful to the Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribes for being the lead on this grant, and our many tribal agency and university and other partners working together to implement all of this work over the course of 4 years. Next slide, please. And this is just to give you an idea of how this is really structured. As you can see, the grant focuses on biocultural restoration within the Crown of the continent. All of the project activities support actions that fulfill the Confederated Salish Kootenai tribes, and others' vision of repairing historic injustices and in revitalizing, restoring, and repairing their culture and connections to lands and First Foods by braiding Indigenous knowledge and Western science in the way that Mike has shared. Next slide, please. And this is just a few highlights. So of great importance is all of our privilege in supporting CSKT's work to restore their 18,800 acre bison range, which was returned to them by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service in 2021, after 100 years. And so this funding also allows the tribes to address crucial restoration needs that allow them to steward their buffalo herd as they have envisioned. And the new grant clearly supports big connected landscape outcomes through the continued work with the 42 partners on the Crown LCD that Sean talked about across the entire 28,125 square mile landscape. And I'm going to pass it back to Erin right now, but hoping that some of you can stay on for the discussion, which we're looking forward to. Thank you.
Thanks, Anne, and thanks everyone. And thank you to everyone. So this is just our acknowledgement slide. There's really so many people that have been involved in the success of the Crown Managers Partnership over the last couple decades that it's really quite hard. We were joking about like putting together like an end of movie scrolling acknowledgement slide, but couldn't get that together. So really, we just want to end on the note that it really takes a village. Over the years, the CMP has called ourselves a coalition of the willing. Anybody who wants to show up and engage in collaborative management on this landscape that is an agency is welcome to the table. And then we, as Sean described, network through the landscape conservation design across the landscape. So I'm going to stop there because we're slightly over time. And for those of you that have stayed on, we welcome discussion, questions, and any conversation that anyone would like to have. If all the panelists could please turn on their cameras. Hi, Anne.
Yes, thank you to our panel, Erin, Anne, Tara, Sean, Mike, Elliot. A lot of moving parts involved with the Crown Managers Partners. So thank you for giving us a really wonderful overview of all that you're doing. I want to acknowledge that it is the top of the hour and we might have folks that need to go, but we do want to have an opportunity for you to ask questions of our panel, and they're willing to stay on. So if you do have questions, I would ask that you, at the bottom of your screen, you should see a chat box and also a Q&A box. If you could put your questions in the Q&A box, that will help me keep track of them a little better. So I would appreciate that. Yes, so if there's any questions, please type that into the Q&A box. And while we're waiting for people to type in a question, I'm just curious who, and maybe this is Elliot, who's been the longest member of the Crown Managers Partnership. Or on your steering committee.
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah, apparently, like I said, I was just fresh out of college and worked in Parks Canada, in Waterton with Parks Canada, tracking the Belly River wolves. And my boss said, hey, do you want to come to this meeting and represent the blood tribe? So I had to call our band office and ask the senior executive officer if he was okay. And he said, yeah, go ahead, go represent us. So that's what happened.
And you hardly even have any gray hair, man.
It's coming in, Mike. It's coming
Yeah.
in.
Yeah.
All right, we might have a quiet bunch in our audience. I'm not seeing any questions pop up yet.
We told them that questions are $25 and answers are $50. So maybe it's not payday today.
Maybe it's not. Well, all right, if there's no questions, we're getting a lot of great overview. Oh, here's a question. What role, if any, does the public have in the partnership? That's a great question. Who would like to tackle that?
I'm happy to start while everyone is reflecting, but that is a great question. And I think that one of the things that's really important is and I know everyone shared about the annual forum or conference that we do, and those are open to the public. And they always have a different theme. And some of those themes really resonate strongly with local communities. I remember we had one, gosh, I think it was in Fernie, wasn't it, everybody, up in British Columbia, and it was about white bark pine and five needle pines. And we have a working group. That's a great, a core focus for the Crown Managers Partnership and the Crown LCD, as well as the restoration activities under the new America the Beautiful grant. And people love white bark pine and have deep affection for them. And there was a really big response from the community and I think even the mayor and others in coming to the forum and really wanting to learn more and understand how those really precious ancient high elevation forests were being restored and managed and stewarded. And so sometimes we have themes that really resonate very strongly. And I think last year, for example, we were very fortunate to be able to have the Blackfeet Nation welcome us into the Blackfeet Reservation for the forum. And that really allowed an amazing amount of, Elliot was the co-lead for that. And just he and his co-lead did an amazing job. And one of the things that Elliot did, feel free to jump in, Elliot, is work with school kids from the Blood Nation. And they came across the border on school buses and they showed up. And there was this very big youth component, which is something that's incredibly important and is being brought forward into the forum this year. So I'll stop there, but hopefully that gives you a flavor of some of the ways in which that changes over time and is also consistent over time.
Yeah, thanks, Anne. Maybe I'll just add, reflecting back on last year's forum, and this one's, I believe, going to include youth as well. Our Blackfoot, what we believe, and I know a lot of other Indigenous nations, but feel the same, is our communities are all inclusive. So we don't leave anybody out. We include everybody. And so that's what it was really powerful at last year's forum, having the youth panel and the elders panel, and just a lot of the discussion and the exchange with the attendees. I think, and I heard this after, that was one of the most powerful sessions at the forum. So it was, really great to include the whole community. And I don't think we mentioned it specifically, but I think it's important just to say that what I really noticed when I first got involved with the CMP, with the Belly River wolf experience, with bull trout work I did, was I found back then the managing agencies kind of worked in silos and didn't talk to each other a whole bunch. But that's really changed a lot. And I'm really glad to say that's how the CMP operates, is, we're really open and inclusive. So I'll end there. Thank you.
So kind of one final question, and I can answer this, is someone's curious how many participants are participating in this Zoom seminar today besides the panelists. So we have the 6 panelists and me, and we had about 30 participants online with us today, but we had 50 plus people register for the seminar. It is being recorded, and I just want to share that in a couple of days that recording will be put on our Rocky Mountain CSU seminar page, and that link will be shared with all of you who attended today and those who registered but who could not make it. I want to be very conscious of people's time, and we're moving to almost a quarter past the hour. So I think we'll wrap it up today. Again, I want to thank you to all the participants who stayed on to the very end here, and to our panelists, the Crown Managers Partnership. You do such great work, and it's wonderful to see all the different partner groups from agencies across the borders, country borders, state borders, provinces borders, tribal borders, working with the universities and conservation organizations to tackle issues that are important to all of this. So thank you, panel, for giving such a great overview today. And we have one last thing. We do have another session on April 10th that I mentioned, and I'll also share information on that presentation if you would like to register for that one as well. So thank you, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, CESU.